Okay, so today we're going to dip into Sylvester McCoy's Seventh Doctor era with a look at the show's first ever three-part story, Delta and the Bannermen. Shout out to Colin Mallet, who suggested this particular review. So, basic nuts and bolts first. Delta and the Bannermen first aired on the BBC across November 1987. It was written by Malcolm Cole, which was his only Doctor Who story, and directed by Chris Clough, who also helmed the Seventh Doctor serials Dragonfire, The Happiness Patrol, and Silver Nemesis. So basically a full third of the McCoy era, as well as Terror of the Vervoids and The Ultimate Foe for the Sixth Doctor. In a nutshell, the Doctor and his companion Mel, played with trademark unstinting enthusiasm by Bonnie Langford, are making that mistake all Doctors and their companions make by going on holiday. No! On a Nostalgia Tours space cruiser, designed as an old bus, so that's some smart cuss cutting right there, a group of aliens transformed to look like humans are taking off from a dingy old spaceport in the year 4687 for a trip to 1950s Earth to visit Disneyland, and Mel is along to join them for the ride while the Doctor follows on in his TARDIS. However, one of the passengers, Delta, played with a regal demeanour by Belinda Main, is a Chimeron Queen. Or is it Chimeron? One of those. And she's on the run from the vile Bannermen, a violent humanoid race intent on wiping out the Chimeron? I'm going to call them Chimeron. When the bus hits a satellite, instead of arriving at Disneyland, it crash lands near a Welsh holiday camp called Shangri-La in 1959, where the Doctor and Mel must help Delta both protect a new young Chimeron Queen who's in her care and defeat the terrible warlike Bannermen for good. Alright, so I like Delta and the Bannermen, but I think I like it more for what it's trying to be than what it actually succeeds in being. There are a lot of good ideas here, and there's a feel about the whole thing that resonates with something that we might have seen in the Doctor Who magazine comic strip at the time, with its horrible, downtrodden spaceports, nasty bounty hunters, the garish violence, and generally madcap concepts. As far as those strips go, it used to be said that there was much greater scope within those frames to do things that the TV show just simply never could have managed. That said, for the time and the budget, the special effects aren't bad. There's an alien moon in the sky during the opening battle sequence that more or less works, and there are a few nice shots of things happening in space, including a shot of the Nostalgia Tours bus floating next to the TARDIS. Ooh. But the sequences where we see the Bannerman ship land or take off, they're a bit on the shonky side. My 10-year-old, who was watching alongside me, he's generally quite forgiving, but even he laughed out loud at that. Maybe it would have been better if those scenes had taken place at night. As usual with 80s Who, a lot of these effects suffer from terrible lighting choices. This is a shame because the dingy spaceport that we see near the start is lit perfectly with a grungy look that would have better suited the blood-soaked, belligerent Bannermen. But instead, it all takes place against a sunny, rural backdrop that doesn't really do it any favours. That does work for the summer holiday camp scenes, of course, at least to a degree, but there's still something a bit LARPy about these weirdly clean black uniforms running around the place and growling. The 1950s as a setting, though, it's a great choice. The fashions are iconic. Mel looks great in this, and honestly, it's a cool, distinctive look for a Doctor Who story, as well as a nice reminder that the Doctor is a time traveller, even if he's not the only one in this outing. There's also an attempt, in Delta and the Bannermen, to tug on some very recognisable human emotions. We're introduced to a young mechanic called Billy, played by David Kinder, and his friend Ray, played with extremely likeable humanity by Sarah Griffiths. She's a capable, motorbike-loving young woman who herself is no stranger to a socket wrench. Ray clearly has a thing for Billy, but the feeling is unreciprocated, and Billy himself is falling fast for Delta, the Chimeron Queen. In fact, the problem with the Delta-Billy love story is that it feels too rushed, meaning that we have one of those rare instances when a Doctor Who story would have benefited from an extra episode. which in this case would have simply meant the standard 4-part formula. 1 minute, Billy is looking at Delta on the bus. The next, he's injecting himself with space goo in order to change his biology so that he can go off with her and the kid and be an intergalactic dad. I wonder how he'd feel about that if he knew that male Chimarons kinda look like giant green plastic soldiers with burnt tennis balls for faces. Anyway, we don't see this relationship blossom. We don't see any intimate moments between them that shows how their love is growing. We're just told that that's how it is and we're meant to accept it. The story does do a good job of showing us how genuinely heartbroken Rey is about the whole thing. There's a really nice sequence where she and the Doctor are trying to find Delta and Billy by searching all of the special places that she assumed were just for her and Billy. There's definitely a certain kind of pathos to it. The alien kid, the proto-Chimaron queen, is pretty cool, even if its appearance causes a badly orchestrated cliffhanger that sees Mel scream like a maniac while the kid is still basically a silver egg barely cracking, and before the child emerges from the egg as a really disgusting snot baby with a sort of puckered bumhole mouth that's more worthy of a delirious yell of horror than anything else I've ever seen in Doctor Who. But I like the kid's supercharged growth process and the strange, high-pitched warbling noises it makes and the later references that we get that hint that the Chimaron race operates to some extent like a bee colony. We get those hints from one of Delta and the Bannermen's excellent cast of characters, Goronwy, the wise, poetic beekeeper who lives near the camp and is played with full-tilt pastoral lovability by Hugh Lloyd. We also have Burton, the guy that runs the holiday camp, a former major by the sound of it, who's willing to stay behind and fight for what's right. Richard Davies does a great job of making Burton immediately likeable and someone that you root for. He could have so easily been annoying, but thanks to Davies, we see the hero. Murray the space driver, played by Johnny Dennis, is also someone we immediately like and who has a character that we can latch onto. We want all of these people to succeed. Someone who isn't immediately likeable is the leader of the Bannermen, a nasty, thuggish piece of work called Gavrok, played with growling, no-good gangster menace by Don Henderson. You know he's evil because he shoots Ken Dodd in the back. Nasty. Gavrok is a credible villain to some degree, but honestly, you'd think someone so ruthless would be a lot better at killing his enemies, or at least the specific enemies he wants to kill. Because it's not like he's exactly lazy when it comes to taking lives, but still, he makes some peculiar decisions, like letting the Doctor just leave with his hostages as if he's giving them a head start before chasing them. It doesn't make any sense. Then again, I guess you'd have no drama if this kind of stuff always made perfect sense. Then anyway, I'm willing to let a lot of nonsense slide if I get to see a baddie literally chewing on a pig's face. I'm not kidding. He does that. He chews on a pig's face. On screen. Close up. Blech. So, how does Delta and the Bannermen rank? For me, it's a fairly respectable 6.3 out of 10. The pacing might have been helped if we had dropped the whole US agent subplot, with time giving away to what I suppose is meant to be a comedy duo, return to the love story between Billy and Delta. I mean, I know that these guys are meant to be tracking the satellite that caused the bus to crash, but still, losing them essentially affects nothing. I do like the way that the Doctor stands by the TARDIS in the spaceport, watching as the Chimaron Queen flees towards the tour bus to make her escape. It kind of hints at the chess-playing master manipulator that the Seventh Doctor would famously become. I wonder, was Cartmel's master plan already in place by this point? Maybe. I just can't be bothered to check. There are also some really odd musical choices, common really to the McCoy era, that just grate on the ears and make the action hard to take seriously or to fully enjoy. This is down to Kev McCulloch, who I can't help feel made the decision to make all his musical notes in Doctor Who just sound like variations on his own first name. Kev, 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 Kev. Just listen to it. You'll know what I mean. There were moments when my son thought he was listening to the backing track of Mario Kart, and you know what? He's right. So when you combine that with the lighting, it makes it hard to take those moments of action drama seriously, especially those grittier moments of Bannerman violence and spite. It just doesn't work. And because these are very early days for the new Doctor, we're still in that really annoying phase where he's constantly mixing up idioms and aphorisms. Like, there's many a slip twixt two in the bush. Just stop it. Lastly, for me, Delta and the Bannerman loses a few points, or points, because it leaves Ray behind. Ray, essentially a proto-ace, would have been so much better than the ace that we got. If I remember correctly, that was the initial idea. That's why Ray is portrayed as so handy, mechanically and otherwise, and self-sufficient. Sure, she's bummed out about Billy, but she doesn't let it get in the way of doing what needs to be done. I reckon they just didn't want a Welsh accent in the TARDIS. Much better to go with an authentic, rough diamond, streetwise kid instead, brought up in the hard ghettos of leafy Hampshire. I say, Toe-Rag, you are partaking in a laugh, are you not? Most decidedly wicked. So there we have it, Delta and the Bannermen. Never a chore to watch, full of great characters and interesting concepts. It's just all those ingredients somehow never quite manage to gel, and the story sadly comes across as less than the sum of its parts. Just enough time then to pick 3 things from this story for my personal TARDIS databanks. Number 1. He's been ionized! Ray says that twice. Just imagine, if she'd become a companion, that would have made an amazing catchphrase. He's been ionized! Number 2. That song. Here's to the future. Love is the answer. Wow. I mean, we could have had a serious rival there for the Ballad of the Last Chance Saloon. Number 3. When the Bannermen get covered in honey. Imagine if it was remade with Nicolas Cage in the role of Gavrok. No! Not the bees! Not the bees! Delta and the Bannerman, folks. As usual, leave your thoughts in the comments along with any requests for future reviews. Until next time, here's to the future. Love is the answer.